So former UCT lecturer Athol Williams says he's been living in fear for 7 months since he testified at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. As I'm sure you know by now, he's fled the country, saying government has failed to protect him after receiving warnings about threats to his life. He's added that the murder of Gauteng health official Babita Deokaran heightened his fears that he too would be silenced. So what legal steps should be taken by the state to try to protect the brave men and women who blow the whistle on corruption? For perspective on this story, let's bring in Advocate Paul Hoffman, Director at Accountability Now. He joins us now via our video link. Advocate Hoffman, always great chatting to you. Thanks very much indeed for making time. I want to just begin by gauging your reaction to what Athol has done. I mean, given the plight of whistleblowers in this country, were you at all surprised by the length that he's had to go to try and ensure at the very least that he stays alive?
Yes, I'm afraid that hiding in plain sight overseas is not going to necessarily make it possible for him to survive any assassination attempt, which seems to be the reason for him leaving. The problem is that there is insufficient legal protection of whistleblowers in South Africa. Whistleblowing is approached by the law as part of labor relations, and whistleblowers who are not employees of the company or entity on whom the whistle is blown have no protection at all, and even those that are employees cannot get into a state-sponsored whistleblower protection program unless they are a witness in pending criminal proceedings. And as we know, our National Prosecuting Authority is particularly slow at getting on with the corruption cases that are begging to be heard in the light of the evidence that has been given at the Zondo Commission by many, many witnesses who find themselves unprotected. So we need legal reform. We need civil society to take a careful look at its attitude towards whistleblowers and to be more supportive of whistleblowers. We need the legal and the medical professions to stand up for whistleblowers by giving pro bono or contingency fee assistance to whistleblowers. And the idea of creating a whistleblower protection fund against which those who have suffered, like Athol Williams, can make claims is also one whose time has come. Right.
We'll speak about what that support looks like, especially from civil society, given their own issues, for lack of a better term. But you've touched on what I feel is a multiplicity of issues, right? Among them is the slow rate of prosecution for cases that in some instances wouldn't have even made it to the light of day without whistleblowers. That kind of delay certainly also has a chilling effect on anybody else who would want to come forward in the future.
No, absolutely. Accountability Now has on the desk of the President, on the desk at Parliament's Constitutional Review Committee, and on the desk at Latuli House, draft legislation which seeks to address the delays in the prosecution of the seriously corrupt people in South Africa, and which seeks to address the lot of whistleblowers who draw that form of malfeasance to the attention of the public and the authorities. So it's really the law can only be changed by Parliament, and if Parliament doesn't do anything when asked to do what needs to be done, then it is time for the people of South Africa to rethink who they put into Parliament to represent them.
Yeah. With that in mind, and that parliamentary process might take some time, one would imagine that hopefully there'd be kind of cushions, for lack of a better term, for whistleblowers. You're suggesting in some respects that these could come from civil society, but these are the same organizations that themselves feel quite hamstrung because of a lack of resources, etc. What kind of support in that context really can be provided to whistleblowers?
Yes, look, from the civil society point of view, Corruption Watch and the Institute of Ethics have produced a handbook for whistleblowers. There is widespread support among the civil society organizations that become involved in litigation for whistleblowers, and it's really a question of education of the public too often the whistleblower is seen as an impimpi or as a Judas or as a tattletale and is shunned socially. Actually, the whistleblowers in South Africa are heroes of the struggle for freedom, and they need to be regarded as such generally in society and held up as examples of good citizenship.
Right. I'll tell you what I find particularly distressing is how one whistleblower after the other mentions how they struggle quite literally to maintain some kind of living because of speaking out. That, at the very least, is also an indictment on corporate South Africa for the many gaps that they leave open, quite glaringly, to people who've decided to take what many would agree is a very brave route.
Yes, we are trying at Accountability Now, we are trying our best to persuade corporate South Africa that there are ways and means of assisting whistleblowers, and I mentioned in this interview that the idea of creating a whistleblowers protection fund, that contributed to by employers and by civil society, is a fund that a person in the situation in which Athol Williams finds himself is able to go to the fund and say, I've lost my job, I've lost my house, I've had terrible medical expenses because of the post-traumatic stress disorder that I have suffered, and I have huge legal bills because I have been hounded and forced out of my job by the employer against whom I blew the whistle. Athol Williams blew the whistle on 39 people. So he sees 39 knives coming towards his back. That degree of bravery deserves acknowledgement.
At the very least, yeah. The complexity, of course, Advocate Hoffman, is that the very institutions that are best poised to actually finance that funding may very well be implicated by the whistleblowers who are lifting the lid on corruption, given how widespread the skullduggery is in our country.
Yes, I think that the capture of the National Prosecuting Authority, its hollowing out, and the presence of saboteurs within the National Prosecuting Authority, and the general lack of political will to counter corruption by ending the culture of impunity. And that's what you're referring to. People do corruption in South Africa and they get away with it because the criminal justice administration is just not up to the task of holding them to account. So the Hawks are understaffed, under-resourced, lacking in independence, lacking in the specialized skills and training that they need, and certainly not secure in their tenure of office. So they don't even get the investigations required off the ground. And you get to hear about grand corruption and kleptocracy at hearings like the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, which is quite separate from the Criminal Justice Administration.
Yeah.
So unless and until the Criminal Justice Administration is reformed in a way that makes it effective and efficient, it is going to be pretty awful to be a whistleblower in South Africa. We have put draft legislation on the table. We get no response. The President has been sitting on it since August. The Constitutional Review Committee was only shown our stuff at the beginning of this month, and I'm waiting to hear from the acting Secretary General of the ANC, to whom I've suggested that the ANC's own resolution about dealing with corruption is one that needs to be acted on. But it's been forgotten since August last year, which is, 14, 15 months now.
Right. You speak about the awful experience that many of these whistleblowers go through. I mean, whether it's Athol Williams, Tema Maseko, Bianca Goodson, and I'm sure you can go on with that list, there's a common thread of how speaking out also has a direct bearing on their loved ones. Do we take enough time to acknowledge and try intervene at that level?
Yes, that would be where the medical professions come in with help with the post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental problems that occur, not only in the whistleblower, but also in the families of the whistleblower. Families get torn apart by the courage.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much for your reflections. One can only hope that there's some kind of solution sooner rather than later, because at the very least, it feels like this is a race against time, at least insofar as allowing other people to come forward. But for now, thank you for your reflections. Really do appreciate it. Advocate Paul Hoffman is a director for Accountability Now.